A new Islamic history film after Cineworld caved into angry Muslim protesters who claim it is blasphemous. The Lady of Heaven is a British flick written by a Shia Muslim, but it has riled Sunni Muslims with its depiction of the Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima and some of the holiest figures in Islam. So here's a reminder of how one cinema manager in Bolton gave in.
Let him talk 1 minute!
I am the manager of this cinema, and I'm just confirming that this film is cancelled tonight. And for the rest of this week, we will not be showing this film again. We will not be showing this film again.
Cineworld then cancelled the film everywhere over fears for the safety of its staff, while protests have since erupted outside of View Cinema in Westfield Stratford Shopping Centre in East London. This was one of the threats being made by protesters.
Birmingham will not tolerate the disrespect of our Prophet, peace be upon him, and there will be outcomes from your actions. You will have repercussions for your actions. We have been trained from birth that we must defend the honor of our Prophet, and we will lay our life on the line.
Critics have pointed out that we don't have blasphemy laws in this country and argued our right to freedom of expression in the arts should trump contention over the depiction of religious figures. But I want to know what you think about this one. It's highly controversial. Should Cineworld have banned The Lady of Heaven after Muslim outrage? Email me, dan@gbnews.uk, tweet me @gbnews. You can vote in our poll while you're there. But my roster for tonight's clash includes two people at the very centre of this storm. The film's executive producer, Hussein Ashmir, is joined by imam, writer and organiser of some of the protests, Maulana Shahid Alim. I'm also joined by teacher and activist Aisha Ali Khan and lawyer Khalil Yousaf. So it's great to have all of you here. Look, I'd like to come first to you, Maulana, because, of course, you have been leading some of these protests. Why? If you don't like this film, don't go and see it. Why do you want it banned?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. And just a small correction, my surname is Ali. So it's Maulana Shahid Ali. Anyway, this film we find very divisive and very inflammatory, and we find it to misrepresent 2 billion Muslims across the world, because this film depicts our central figures of our religion, the foremost caliphs of Islam, Abu Bakr and Umar, Allah be pleased with them both, as terrorists, as people who conspired to murder the daughter of the Prophet and actually murdered the Prophet as well, according to this film narrative, and even murdered the unborn son of Lady Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And we find this extremely disturbing, where this film is drawing parallels with these first caliphs of Islam and ISIS, whereas ISIS is a fringe extremist radical movement which mainstream Muslims across the board, across the different various schools of thought, outright reject. So for having a film like this in the UK, I am absolutely shocked that it was even allowed in the cinema in the first place. And I'm also absolutely shocked someone like Yasser al-Habib, who was exiled from Kuwait due to his radical views and radical preaching, how on earth has he managed to pass this movie onto the UK cinema screens? I find this preposterous, outrageous, and I see it as an attack on communal relations and communal harmony between the Sunni and Shia communities.
I'm going to interrupt you there simply because we're struggling a bit with your line. We'll see if we can improve the audio, but I do get the sense of what you're saying. So, Hussein, let me come to you. You're the executive producer of this movie. How do you respond?
Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks for having us in. What I would like to say is Mr. Maulana needs to understand that we live in the United Kingdom. This isn't Pakistan. He cannot allow, or we cannot allow him to speak for 2 billion Muslims. Neither does he or his goons speak for the 500 million Shia that believe and hold this rhetoric in very high demand. So he needs to understand that his beliefs are in line with ISIS views. His beliefs are in line with Taliban, very much pro-Taliban. They were holding, and I saw Mr. Maulana myself in a footage in Bradford with his goons holding placards of ISIS supporters. What does that say? Are we going to let a mob that Mr. Maulana has managed to muster bully the British public, British cinema goers? I mean, it's a shame that Cineworld ended up pulling the film. But they must understand that if they were to give in to people like Mr. Maulana and his goons, that this is what's going to happen. You know, they will come up on various different media outlets and proclaim victory. And the fact is, it's a sad day for British cinema. But View are still holding strong. They've increased their showings in different cinemas, and this is a story that is held extremely dear by 500 million Muslims. He doesn't speak for everybody. He speaks for himself. He speaks to the ISIS supporters. He also speaks to the Taliban supporters. He doesn't speak for all Muslims. Many Muslims have contacted us, and they have been extremely pleased with the film. So, I think he's in his own bubble. He's trying to make a box for everybody to live in, especially the Muslims. And certainly, as I'll once again reiterate, he doesn't speak for everyone. He speaks for himself and for his goons.
Khalil Yusuf, where do you stand on this?
Well, actually, I'm slightly disappointed to hear these two sides of this story, because actually Islam is that religion which is aimed to create peace and to unify people. And I think what's disappointing is that we're in a position where Islam is getting extremely bad publicity, when in fact there are so many positive things about Islam that we can talk about. One point that I do want to make is that everybody, of course, has the right to freedom of expression, but amongst Muslims, and I suspect that the main target audience of this film is indeed Muslims who are interested in the historical facts surrounding the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, and also his successors. And it's disappointing that the film depicted Prophet Muhammad. For all Muslims, the depiction of Prophet Muhammad is something that we broadly, all universally agree shouldn't happen. And I think I'm disappointed that that level of respect that should be given to historical figures has not been given within the film.
According to your view, that's not necessarily the case. That is not the case.
I would say that for the majority of Muslims, they would say that
you do not speak for the majority of the Muslims.
I'm here to offer my opinion, which I'm doing, and
and that's your opinion, and you are entitled to it, because we live in the United Kingdom, and in the United Kingdom, you are allowed your opinion. However, you cannot speak for the majority of the Muslims. There are a majority. I can then turn around and say the majority of the Muslims have no problem if the Prophet was to be portrayed in a beautiful, holy picture anywhere in the world.
And you're saying you have tried to do this sensitively in your film, haven't you?
Absolutely. Dan, it's worth noting that we had the best people in the industry working on this. We spent millions ensuring that the research was done correctly. We spent millions making sure that the best companies in the world that deal with the CGI picture portrayed the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the most beautiful manner possible. And then your guest comes in and says, the majority of Muslims. I respectfully disagree. You are entitled to your opinion because we live in the United Kingdom. And guess what? Yes. In the United Kingdom, we're allowed to have our own opinions.
And we have freedom of expression, especially for the entertainment industry.
Fantastic. Why is that so hard to understand?
I want to bring in Aisha Ali Khan here, who is a teacher and activist. Aisha, are you opposed to the decision by Cineworld to ban this movie?
Hi everyone. Yes, I am. I just want to point out that I am a Sunni Muslim, but I've grown up with many Shia neighbours, and I have very good friends that are Shia as well. So I have
So even as a Sunni Muslim, you're okay with this movie?
I went to see it yesterday. I actually went to the view in Leeds. Surprise, surprise. It was pulled today, so it's no longer being shown up north. It's only been shown in 4 cinemas, by the way, and they're all down south, Reading, Watford, and 2 in London. I don't agree with the protests, simply because it's totally backfired. So beforehand, we had messages basically condemning this film, talking about it, telling us to boycott. And if those kinds of messages had been adhered to, we would not have this massive tsunami of attention and publicity that the film has now garnered. If those people had stayed at home and just boycotted it, because nobody was forcing them to watch it, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. And I've seen a lot of the footage of people shouting, intimidating, threatening. And I know if I was going to go to a cinema and I saw crowds like this outside, I would turn around and go home. And it's not fair that people who managers and staff in cinemas that were basically turning up and doing their jobs, basically trying to earn a living, being bullied and intimidated and harassed. So I do not agree with that whatsoever. However, picking up some of the points, I did find the movie quite offensive. I was surprised to see the portrayal of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him's face. It was done in a very beautiful, loving way. I totally agree with what Hussein said. But
so you didn't find any of it offensive?
I did. I found some elements deeply offensive. I found.
Oh, you did? Okay.
You know, I did. But having said that, I wanted to go and see it because I wanted to make my own mind up about it.
Can you just elaborate on what elements you found particularly offensive?
Well, the historical facts, for example, but that's interpretation. Like I said, I have an understanding of Shia beliefs. I have no problems with what Shias believe because, as far as I'm concerned, everybody should be allowed to believe and practice our faith in whichever manner they want to, because at the end of the day, you have to answer for your own actions and for your own beliefs to the Almighty.
Yeah, so let me bring Khalil. I want to bring Khalil Yusuf back in on this because, Khalil, so Aisha says, look, she's seen the movie. She is offended by certain aspects of it, but she believes that because of freedom of expression, the fact that we're a free country, it should be able to be screened.
So I'm not advocating the view that the film should necessarily be banned. I mean, that's a decision for the British Board of Film Classification and the government as a whole. But what I'm saying is that it's important that the historical facts are represented in a way that represents history relatively accurately. Look, if you're Amber Heard or you're Johnny Depp and you say something wrong, then you're able to go to the courts and say something is wrong, and the courts should then hold the person who has said some untruth to account, and there's a remedy. When you're dealing with historical facts, particularly with religion and things that people find really important, the reality is that there is no legal remedy because you can't bring proceedings for defamation when somebody has passed. And this is one of the reasons why people get very upset when something as important as the successes of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is represented in a way that appears to be a documentary or appears to be an accurate depiction of history when it isn't. So I'm not saying that the Shia community and my friend here, Hussein, should not be able to have this movie. But if there is a significant difference of opinion, then the right way to go in something that appears to be a documentary is to air those opinions from both sides. And unfortunately, both sides of that opinion have not been aired.
Okay.
And the film has been represented as being an accurate depiction of history when the reality is that it is highly contested.
Hussein, I want to come to you finally. Has this controversy been damaging or positive for the film? And do you feel at all like your personal safety and security is under threat at all, given some of the rhetoric that we've seen from the protesters?
Dan, thank you for that question. I mean, I just want to quickly touch upon the point that your guest here just made. I mean, it's quite clear, we've made it quite clear that this is a Shia Muslim narrative. It's a narrative that is held dear by 500 million Muslims. That's more than the United States population, that's more than the United States, Australia, and other countries. So the fact is that you try to dismiss that as in, you know,
but that this really isn't true. Iran has banned the movie, and Iran is with the largest number.
The fact that they have banned the film doesn't make any difference. Iran is a government that is allowed to have their own decisions. But the fact is, they are Shia Muslim country. The fact that the Shia Muslims have a narrative, we should be allowed. This is the United Kingdom. May I remind you, this is not Iran. No,
and I get
this is not Pakistan.
So what happens to the film now?
The fact is, if we are in the United Kingdom and I am allowed As a British citizen, as a British movie maker...
And I get that point, but what happens now to the film, given that it has been pulled in so many of these cinemas?
Well, it's been pulled by some cinemas, and some cinemas have given it extra showings, and we've had, like I said, a huge tailwind. I mean, there's obviously there are other future projects. There's most likely going to maybe see this on Netflix and Amazon. You know, we're speaking to them, so let's see what happens with that. I mean, they're not going to be able to succumb and suppress this narrative. It's
that
there
would
for
be a
people
big
to
deal.
see.
And your personal safety? Do you feel like it's your personal safety? Do you feel it's
Dan, this is something that is obviously usually discussed, but if we start fearing for our personal safety, and if we allow these thugs to intimidate us, what happens? They win, and we're not going to allow that to happen. I mean, the Shia Muslims have been oppressed throughout the world for over 1,000 years. It's enough. That's not going to happen anymore. We are going to be able to use our narrative in a way where we don't intentionally try to insult anyone. This is a view. You are able and you are allowed to view and disagree with it. But don't tell me that I'm not allowed to. And then you have your films and you have your movies praising the so-called companions of the Prophet. No, hold on. You make films all the time showcasing the companions of the Prophet that you hold to a very high regard, that you know very well that the Shia community will find offensive, yet you do it. And the Shia community stay silent and let you get on with it. But as soon as the Shia community make one film, then the whole world goes up in arms in the UK.
I think this has been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much for having it. Personally, I don't believe in censorship in any form, and so I hope, Hussein, that you are able to get the movie to a wider audience. That is Hussein Ashmir, Maulana Shahid Ali, Aisha Ali Khan and Khalil Yusuf. Thank you so much. So who do you agree with on this? Was Cineworld right to ban this film amid Muslim outrage? Well, Sean on Twitter says this film was pulled from cinemas due to the fear of repercussions. Violence, threats and intimidation are not acceptable ever, and there should be no censorship based on religious belief. From John on Twitter, we can't allow intimidation and mob rule from any religion or ideology to decide what is acceptable in this country. But Dennis on Twitter says the fact that we live in a democracy is being ignored here. Religion is a free choice and should not be allowed to be shackled by anyone. And your verdict is now in. Only 3% of you agree that Cineworld was right to ban the film after Muslim outrage. 97% of you say it should remain in cinemas. Coming up, she turned her back on the Tories, but former Minister and political firebrand Anne Widdecombe is stumping for Boris to save the country from a disastrous socialist coalition, Big Witty style at 9:50. But first, how have we reached the point where the MSM are so brazen with their anti-Boris bias? Mark Dolan tries to get to the bottom of it all in The Outsider next.